Alright, as I mentioned, the next thing I want to talk about when it comes to layers is something called layer styles. And that's what these effects icons represent on these individual layers here. Now, layer styles are a collection of effects that are preset inside Photoshop that you can apply and modify depending on what type of objects you're going to be applying them to. So I'm just going to jump over here to this original box image that we had, and I'm just going to create a new layer, and you just do that by clicking the new icon, which is the second to the last one right here at the bottom of the layers panel. Let me just resize that. That'll create a new blank layer. You can also go into the flyout menu and choose New Layer. Also, under the layer menu itself, you can choose New Layer just right there. So on this new blank layer, I'm going to grab my rectangular marquee tool, and I'm just going to draw a box. And let's go ahead and get a color in here. I'm going to go into the Edit menu and go down here to Fill. And I'm just going to use 50% gray as my fill, and I'm just going to click OK. So now I've drawn a gray box onto this blank layer. Well, now I want to apply an effect to this. So I can do this several different ways. I can go into the flyout menu here, right at the bottom of the panel, and choose whichever effect it is I want to apply. In fact, in this case, I'm going to go ahead and apply a bevel and emboss. And when I do that, it opens up this menu, which allows me to modify that specific effect. I can even add additional effects to it. Of course, now bevel and embossing, these layer styles have been in Photoshop for quite a few versions, but there was a time when we didn't have layer styles at all. We actually had to do these various effects like drop shadows and beveling and embossing all from scratch. And layer styles have made it considerably easier for us to apply these effects and even modify them after we've applied them. So you can see I've applied a bevel and emboss. I can go here and change the style of the embossing. And these are all various different types of effects you can apply. And while I won't be able to cover every aspect of layer styles, I want you to go in there and really experiment with them because they have all kinds of possibilities with regard to them. You can go in here and increase the size, the depth of your beveling. You can even adjust the shading or lighting aspects of it. Just by moving this little icon around, the circle here, it will determine your lighting direction on the object. You can see wherever I position the icon here corresponds with the lighting on the object itself. And you have your highlight and shadow mode, so you don't have to live with black and white colors. You can go in here and click directly on that little color swatch there and just change the color. If I just want to make that a red shadow there, we can certainly do that. We can add other layer styles as well. If I go in here and I want to add a drop shadow to this item, you simply highlight that property and it reveals the different parameters for that. So if I uncheck Use Global Light, which if you have the global light checked on, it means basically that all the lighting effects you apply throughout your layer styles, whether it's the bevel and embossing, the drop shadow, they're all going to correspond the same. So by unchecking that, you're actually able to modify the lighting on this specific effect individually. And there's just like the bevel and embossing, you move this line around the circle, it determines where the shadow is going to go. Now, in addition to that, you can modify these settings all with these sliders and everything like that, but you can also, as long as the layer style window is open, simply drag it off to the side and you can click and drag that object wherever you want. So in this case, I can modify that drop shadow by dragging it over here a little bit. Maybe I want to increase the size to soften it up a little bit. All that is done right inside there. Now, as I mentioned, these are live effects. So if I've made these changes and I go in here and click OK, you'll notice what happens inside the layers panel. It has applied the effects icon and now it reveals what I have done. I have effects applied to this. I have a drop shadow and a bevel and emboss. And they've also got the icons next to them, which means I can turn each one on and off without having to go back into that layer styles panel. In addition to that, I can go in here and modify them. If I double click right on that effects icon, it's going to open that window back up with all those same properties, and I can change them to no matter what I want. If I didn't want that red anymore and I wanted to go back to black, I can certainly do that without having to go and reapply the effect. Now, one other aspect of layer styles that I want to mention before we go out of here is in the blending options. Now, only thing I want to talk about here is these two sliders here. You've got the opacity and the fill opacity. The difference between these two is the opacity will modify the transparency of your entire layer. Everything, your original shape and the layer styles included. So if I drop this down to 0, you'll see everything disappears. So that's affecting the opacity of my entire object. However, the fill opacity, if I drop that down to 0, you'll notice that the layer style itself remains visible. We can still see the bevel, we can still see the drop shadow, but the original pixels on that layer are no longer visible. That's what it is. It'll allow you to apply certain effects over images while making that object transparent and leaving the effects themselves 100%. So that is in a nutshell layer styles. You'll notice that there are a number of different types of layer styles in here, but again, we don't have the time to go through every one of them. This one, I encourage you to go in here and just experiment with each one, get used to what types of things they do. I do have a course over on the Kelby training site that is a mini course all on layer styles and how to apply them and use them effectively in your design. So go over there and check that out, and I'm sure you'll get a lot out of it. Now, before we go, I just want to talk about one more aspect of layers, and that's the concept of blend modes. I'm going to jump back over to this image here, this layered image that we had, and you'll notice as I toggle through some of these layers and highlight them, right up in here there's a menu. And if I highlight different layers, you'll notice that many of these layers are set to different blend modes, basically. And what blend modes are is a way of your layers blending with the layers beneath it. You'll notice if I just go over here and grab my move tool, and we're highlighted on this layer here, if I just move this over a little bit, what this is a layer that contains a lighting effect on it. And if I go over here and take the blend mode back to normal, you'll notice that it's simply just a grayscale version of that frame. But I applied a lighting effect to it, and I wanted it to blend it with the original frame. So if I turn off the visibility of that layer, you'll notice that we can see the original layer. So when I turn the visibility of that back on, but I want it to blend with the original layer, not looking like gray like this. That's why I chose to go ahead and change it to the blend mode to overlay. You'll notice that it has enhanced the coloring on there. And this is what blend modes do. They affect the colors, and you'll notice they're broken down into categories. You've got these areas that affect the darkness, you've got these blend modes that affect the lightness of your image, and these values, or these settings, control the overall values of your image, rendering the 50% gray neutral in just in these areas here. Which is why if you see on the normal mode, we've got light and dark areas, but it's overall gray. By putting it in overlay mode, I'm only able to see those light and dark areas while rendering those gray areas completely neutral. So blend modes are an effective way of enhancing and even doing some corrections or adjustments to your images by using blend modes. And we'll talk about that a little bit later. But I hope you get a better understanding of layer styles. Like I said, there's a course on the Kelby training talking about layer styles in general or in more specific ways, and talking about blend modes as well.